This is my journey. Inspired one story at a time, a library of leaders was created. It began as a journey to learn. As time went on, it began to grow. All it needed was a platform, and this podcast was created to listen, to inspire, to share. I am a storyteller, and this is my journey. Welcome to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. I'm your host, Steve Anderson, and today our guest is David Ackert, who is a co-founder and CEO of Ackert Inc. and its subsidiary, Pipeline Plus. He is a highly regarded business development thought leader and has pioneered revenue acceleration programs for hundreds of professional services firms around the globe. He has contributed to the Los Angeles Times, the National Review, the Daily Journal, the Wall Street Journal, and others, and his Market Leaders podcast has won several J.D. Supra Reader's Choice Awards. His new book, The Short List: How to Drive Business Development by Focusing on the People Who Matter Most, is an Amazon bestseller and gold winner of the 2025 Nonfiction Book Awards. So, David, welcome to the program. It's great to have you on today.
Steve, thanks so much for having me.
Now, what we didn't say in the bio there is that you also had a career in Hollywood as a TV actor. So, why don't we just start with a little context and you just give us a little bit of background on you, where you grew up, how you got to Hollywood, and then how you went from Hollywood into the business world.
Sure. Well, my first career and my initial ambitions in life were around the theater and around being an actor. Always loved performing and loved the idea of storytelling and creating an experience for people through that medium. So I got my BFA in acting on the East Coast. Oh, I'm originally from the DC suburbs, so I went to college in Carnegie Mellon and Ithaca College, and then came out to Los Angeles. I figured I would start with television. And it took a little bit to break in, but once I did, I had a good run. I was on a number of TV shows like The West Wing and Jag and Bones and CSI Miami. I had my own show. I was part of an ensemble cast for a while on a show on PBS. So really, enjoyed the good fortune and the success during that period. But I will tell you that being any kind of artist usually involves a bit of a financial roller coaster.
I can
So it's
imagine.
feast or famine, right? When I was on a TV show, I was making really good money, and then when the TV show got canceled or my character was killed off, I was completely unemployed for long stretches of time. So that got old pretty quick, especially once I got married and decided I wanted to start building a more stable lifestyle. So as it happens, when you're an actor, you also start accruing other skills just by necessity, the various day jobs you take on. And so by that point in time, I had been a head of business development at a tech company. I had been a pretty experienced salesperson, taking on various roles in companies, sort of filling between the acting jobs. And so I had this weird kind of collection of skills, which my wife pointed out could be applied well toward professional services firms. She's a lawyer. And she said, here I am as a lawyer. I'm a technician really, but I'm expected to bring in business to get clients. And I have no idea how to do that. I never learned how to do that. But here you are, you're a trained communicator, you're a trained presenter. You've had all this experience with business development and with technology. These are all things that people in professional services ultimately need to learn in order to move up the ranks, but there's no way for them to do it unless they work with consultants like yourself. So we started the business together, she and I, and that was over 20 years ago, and it's just continued to grow ever since.
That's fantastic. And then you wrote this great book. For those that are watching this on video, I'm holding it up here, called The Short List. Very well done, very professional. I was very impressed with it. So nice work on that. And the theme of that is really, developing these key relationships that matter. So just fill us in a little bit about, what is the short list and how did you come up with that term and what does it mean as far as building a business career?
Sure. Well, I guess I'll pick up where I just left off. I had transitioned into this new career. I got a certificate in business coaching. I got my master's in psychology, and I found that I was experiencing a little bit of deja vu because just as in the entertainment industry, where I was building a network with a lot of networking, and finding it to be kind of tedious, right? It's a lot of kissing of frogs. You have lunch with this person and you explore synergies, whatever that means. And sometimes most often you find there aren't any. And here I was starting to build a new business with a new community of professionals, whether they were lawyers or accountants or consultants or whatever they were. And again, a lot of, meeting people in volume and finding that experience to be very tiresome and not particularly efficient. So it started to dawn on me that there were people whose company I enjoyed, and I was much more compelled to want to spend time with them than the people who maybe look good on paper, but ultimately there wasn't as much chemistry in play. So among the people who I enjoyed, I also noticed there was a subset of people who actually had some influence in helping me achieve my goals and people who I could help legitimately. And I realized that that is a short list within a network. And yet, what I observe myself doing and what I observe many other people doing is rather than doubling down on those relationships, there was this thrill of the hunt. But then there's this new person who I just was just introduced to. I should go meet them because you never know. This is the mantra in business development. You never know. So go meet lots of people. Maybe they'll keep you in mind. Maybe lightning will strike. Maybe they'll send you business. And because you never know is the strategy, you have to meet everyone.
Yeah.
And I found that that simply wasn't sustainable, at least not for me. I'm a little bit of an introvert. I really, I'm not somebody who just wants to talk to everybody. And so when I analyzed my network and I saw that there was a short list of people whose company I enjoyed, who I felt were people of substance and character, who I felt had influence to help me achieve my goals and who I genuinely wanted to help in return, I would rather, over a 3-month period, have 3 meetings with them, meeting them once a month, than meet them once and then have a bunch of meetings with people who are not on my short list because you never know.
Yeah. It's really interesting too. And in the book, you also talk about how, developing connections even with a stranger. So there's millions of strangers in our lives, and so you come out, how do you know if it's worth your time to develop with that stranger versus other strangers?
Well, in the book, I talk about the characteristics that qualify someone for your shortlist because a shortlist ultimately is not a static thing, right? You're always meeting new people in life, and hopefully, you're not doing it as a serial networker where it just becomes this exhausting top of funnel exercise. But inevitably, you'll be introduced to various people, or you'll, meet people through your existing contacts. And, those people should be considered, but you want to have a very efficient way of figuring out how much time to invest in that person and ultimately whether or not they belong on your short list. So the first thing I talked about is chemistry. We do that naturally anyway. We know within a few seconds of meeting someone new if there's if we trust them, if we can relax around them, if there's, a good dynamic there. The second is character. And I think that there are tells that if we look for, we can pretty quickly assess whether or not this person shares our values. So, did they show up on time to the meeting, or did they show up late with a bad excuse? Did they, seem like they were prepared for the meeting? Did they, I don't know, go on the LinkedIn account first and take a look at my profile and maybe make a comment about my activity on LinkedIn just to kind of demonstrate to me that they're not showing up cold? Did they, when I started asking them about what they do and the kinds of clients they work with, were they cynical about their response, or did they seem genuinely excited about what they're doing and somebody who has positive energy and someone who I would enjoy, having additional conversations with? These are the little tells that, frankly, within a few minutes of meeting someone, if you're looking for them, begin to give you some sense of the shape of their character.
Yeah.
Did they throw a competitor under the bus, right? Like all of these little things.
Yeah.
So, character is another. Obviously, their capabilities are important because if it's a prospect, you want their capabilities to be low compared to yours so that ultimately there's some justification for them hiring you for your services. You don't want somebody who's just as good at what you do as you are, or even better. But if it's a referral source, you want their capabilities to be high in their area. And again, that's something you can test very quickly in an initial meeting just by asking them, hey, give me an example of some work you've done with a client, or here's a situation I've encountered. How would you deal with this, right? And give them a little bit of that audition, if you will, so that they have a chance to talk about what they do and hopefully impress you with the way that they characterize it.
And then if they are somebody that's going to make the short list, it's about building relationships at that point. Often in my leadership presentations and so on, I say, the most important thing is relationships, relationships, relationships. Remind me of a funny story that when my son went away to college freshman year, and I called him on the phone after a few months, and I was just talking to him, and I said, "Now, Dan, are you going to class? Just tell me that you're going to class."
Yeah.
There was kind of a long pause on the phone, and he said, Dad, where I'm learning the most is in the dorms." He goes, You were right. It's all about relationships." So I just remember that as being so funny because it's true. It's about how you build relationships, how you get along with people, how you communicate. And your book lays that out very well in giving exercises and framework and whatever on how to do this. And you just can't take it for granted. You just can't shoot the bull. You have to intentionally go after it.
Yeah, that's right. And it sounds like your son was playing to his strengths as somebody who was developing a social side of his persona, and that the dorm was the right laboratory for that.
Yeah, yeah, that's for sure. So, you also talk about in the book a little bit about how the traditional networking is broken. So, describe what the traditional networking is and how in this new era that we're in now, it's different.
Sure. Traditional networking was shaped by thinkers like Keith Ferrazzi and his book Never Eat Alone, or by, uh, even perhaps before him, How to Win Friends and Influence People, which is full of, I think, ultimately tactical and maybe even slightly manipulative techniques on how to try to get people to like you.
Mhm.
But as we've entered the 21st century here and we've found ourselves in this era where authenticity is ultimately much more valued. Sort of come as you are and find your people, find the people who are going to accept you the way that you are. I think when we look at the fact that in today's day and age, we are bombarded with messages and opportunities and fake connections through social media that ultimately don't really mean much of anything, we really have to be more discerning. We have to be more purposeful about the people we surround ourselves with. And we have to be careful about what and who we trust. Between fake news and deep fakes and, every other kind of um, uh, uh, bad actor out there that can easily give us the experience of something that might seem trustworthy, but ultimately is not. Just look in your spam email box to see all of the examples of that. We start to recognize that the people who we have vetted, the people who we trust, the people who have demonstrated that they are worthy of our time are ultimately a very precious commodity because there's so much of the other that is coming at us all of the time. And so that's where I feel like traditional networking is broken because it is still predicated on this high volume game. Now, again, I'm not suggesting you don't occasionally go out and meet new people, but I am suggesting that a lot of times we default to that rather than really sitting down and saying, okay, who's on my short list? What are my objectives with these people? And how could I maybe put a little bit more effort into being helpful with them rather than waiting for them to think of me for something?
Mhm.
That intentionality, I have found, pays off in spades.
And so the theory there being that instead of just going and being a taker, trying to get something from somebody to help your career or help what you're doing, you're also going in with the mindset of what can I do to help this person? Because that's essentially what's going to get you probably to the finish line faster is if you can help somebody else, then they're more willing to help you.
Yes, although I would say that is part of traditional networking. I mean, I think the whole give to get, give to grow, those concepts have been around for some time.
Yeah.
But what I find happens is that it's not being a taker that I think I see most often. It's being an opportunist. It again goes back to this notion of you never know. And the problem with this mindset is that occasionally it pays off. You're introduced to someone or you meet someone and you just get lucky and they happen to be exactly the right person that you needed to meet at the right time and they have an opportunity for you or they have an introduction for you or they have a piece of work for you and you say, "See, you never know. That's why I have to use a shotgun and keep going out there and just doing this high volume exercise." But what I would pose as a counter to that is if you use a bow and arrow and you're much more targeted about the people that you're pursuing, whether they're new prospects or whether they are people who you've already met and you've vetted and you've put on your short list and you double down on those relationships, that ends up being a much higher quality experience and ends up delivering much higher quality results.
And I think you also mentioned too, in this world of social media and Instagram, and so many people have all these friends and LinkedIn, all these followers, and it seems like, wow, I'm really connected, but yet we're as isolated as we've ever been. We're as lonely as we've ever been. So those are the kind of relationships that are just surfacey and don't really matter. It's not the short list people you were talking about.
Well, that's absolutely right. I mean, even the fact that we use the word friends, which I don't know about you, but I don't have that many friends. I have a very
Yeah.
small inner circle of people I would truly call a friend. But if
Yeah.
I log into social media, apparently I have thousands of friends. So right there, there's this, for me, a little bit of, inauthenticity or mislabeling or misunderstanding of what a real human connection is.
And it helps me sometimes to kind of look at the science and the history of this stuff too, because we go back and we look at, why did we have tribes? Why
Right.
were there, I think it's 150, isn't it, is the number that, it's hard to really manage friendships and relationships beyond 150. And then in your book too, you talk about, maybe 9 to 35, have your highest priority as to, those are the people that you really need to work on. So having just more and more friends isn't necessarily productive. It can actually go in the opposite direction.
Well, I'll make a couple of distinctions here. I mean, the 150, what you're referring to is Dunbar's number, and he's an evolutionary psychologist who did a lot of research on, as you say, the scope of a tribe. How many people, if you just sort of ran into them in the street, are there in your life whose names you would remember and where you'd have some context on where you know them from? And according to his research, it's about 150 people. So, once you get past 150, it's like, I know you from somewhere, but I can't place your name, right? So we can only hold so many people in our brains. And when you apply the Pareto principle or the 80-20 rule to that number, you end up with around 30 people. And the Pareto principle says that 80% of your results are going to come from 20% of your input. So when you start to think of your network as energy that you are inputting your effort into, then you ultimately do have this small group, this short list. And based on the research that we've gleaned through the CRM platform that we've had in the marketplace for a while now, our users focus on 9 to 35 people and they see growth in their business outcomes. Whereas those users who are more of a spray and pray or a little more intermittent in the way that they approach this don't report anywhere near the same level of success.
And I think you have a unique piece of this as well, of being a celebrity, being on TV. There's probably a lot of people that think they know you and have no idea who they are. And so they come up to you and talk to you like a friend or like a valued contact. And you're just like, who is this person or how do they know me? Which I see that too sometimes with leaders that a lot of people know in the company or in the business world or whatever. And it's hard to know, who's real and who isn't in that situation.
Yeah, well, I think, that was certainly true when I was on television, and it's certainly true now after having written the book that a lot of people will come up to me and, maybe I've met them before, maybe they've just read the book, and there is a sense of connection, but it is stronger for them than it is for me. And by the way, I've been in their shoes. I've met people who I admire or who I consider to be celebrities. And I feel this, draw to them, whereas for them, it's like, ah, boy, here's another guy who wants a selfie.
Yeah. Yeah. So when going back to the book, what did you learn in the process of writing that book? You know, I know you came to it with this idea and with this how this is going to work, and then you write the book. Did it change your opinions, or did it make it different in some way of actually writing the book and publishing it?
Absolutely. You know, anyone who's written a book, I think, will tell this story, especially if it's nonfiction. Um, you've got all these ideas bouncing around in your head and you're thinking about them at kind of a high level. But what a book will challenge, or at least it challenged me to do, is really organize those thoughts, stress test them, show them to people in a way that is like, okay, here's an early draft of the book. Does this even make sense? Is this resonating? And especially as someone who's been running a consulting firm for a couple of decades, again, someone would ask me a question about something that is in the book and I'd have the answer. But no one had ever asked me to list out all of the things in some cohesive order where it sort of tells a story and it ultimately makes a compelling case for the whole knowledge base. When you go through the exercise of putting that together and really making sure that it fits, you find that there are some pieces that need work. You find that there are some holes in your thinking that you need to go research and kind of backfill. And you get much more practiced at talking about that whole concept. And that's certainly what happened for me through the course of writing the book. And then, of course, marketing the book afterwards, having to talk about it over and over again and talk to people who've read it. Ironically, someone who just finished reading the book is going to be more brushed up on my techniques than I am in that moment because it's fresh in their heads, right? And for me, I've got to think back to, oh yeah, was that chapter 5 or 6? I don't remember anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, really interesting. So you're a business coach, consultant. So who's your typical client? Because this is a fairly narrow niche. Do I hire you because I need help in growing my business, or do I hire you because I'm having some culture problems within my business? Who typically is your client?
Sure. So in the early days of this business, it was just myself and my wife, and we were out there, selling our advice. And we started narrowing in on professional services firms as being our primary audience, with an emphasis on law firms. We've had a lot of success in the legal industry. So today, I run a company where we've got a group of consultants, we've got technology, we've got various executive roundtable initiatives, but they all serve primarily the law firms out there. And they tend to be the larger sized firms. So, anywhere from like 50 lawyers on up to thousands of lawyers, because we find that lawyers are technicians. They're very good at practicing law, but they're not necessarily as developed in their skill set when it comes to bringing in clients, developing business, creating a network, being able to prioritize relationships, knowing what to say to those people in order to compel them to want to hire those legal services. So when you say niche, you're right. It's very narrow for me because it's particularly in the legal industry around business development and leadership development, because we find that those are the skills that don't get as much attention in that industry.
I've said this 1,000 times on this show, but it's just always so amazing to me that every career you can think of, there's a leadership component to it. Yet all of our education is focused on the technical side or learning the craft and learning the techniques and whatever, and rarely is the leadership thing talked about and educated on until you get into a company. The more progressive ones are going to have leadership development programs, but it's amazing to me that we don't start more leadership training and in grade school and middle school and high school and through college because it's so important in everything that we do as adults.
You're absolutely right. And to this day, we still see, I'm sure you see it all the time, that people who are really competent technically or really competent in a particular function in the business get graduated into leadership roles, even though it's not necessarily leadership that they're any good at. So now they're being taken away from the thing that is their highest and best contribution to the organization and put in a management role, which is a completely different skill set.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's get into the weeds a little bit more here. So I have this group of friends or acquaintances, however you describe it.
Yeah.
And then who should I add to my short list? Who in my network should I really focus on?
Okay, well, if you're in professional services, and again, this technique is particularly effective for these professional advisors who already have a full-time job, they have clients that they have to, service, but in the margins, they've got to squeeze in business development to build this practice or this book of business. So you're going to need to have some clients in there because your clients are usually your best source of new work. They will hire you for additional projects. They already know you, they like you, they trust you, and you're a vetted resource for them. Then you'll want to put in your referral sources. And if you're at a large organization, that might be internal relationships with whom you're cross-selling, or it could be, the accountant at the firm down the street who also has clients that fit the same profile as yours, and they can potentially refer work to you. Hopefully, you can also reciprocate in kind. And then you'll need some prospects, some prospective clients, because those represent the new logos that will likely be added to your book of business. And they are typically the people that you're targeting. In other words, you're saying, well, great, I've got these middle market clients and they're all well and good, but I want to grow. Wouldn't it be great to have Google as a client? Wouldn't it be great to have Apple as a client? Or, you're sort of going up market here typically. And if you just sort of wait around for those companies to call you, they probably won't. So you want to add them to your shortlist as a prospect because you're going to need to now be proactive about getting in that door and creating that relationship yourself.
And you talk in the book too about connectors and how important connectors are. So when I'm building this relationship and working on my short list, is there a rule of thumb of when it's appropriate for me to ask a connector for that connection?
Well, rule of thumb is tough because there's a few variables here. I mean, the first is what is your comfort level with asking someone for an introduction? And that's going to depend on a lot of things, including your cultural background. In some cultures, that's just considered completely rude, and you would never do that. In some personalities, you're going to find people are very reluctant because they just feel it's too aggressive. Others are much more open about this, much more relaxed about this. So some of it really starts with what's your mindset? What are your reservations when it comes to making a request of someone with whom you have a relationship? Ironically, studies show that when you ask someone for something, it usually strengthens the relationship because we grossly overestimate how inconvenienced people will be when we ask them for help, and so we tend not to, right? We don't want to be that bother or that burden to them. But studies show that they are 6 times more likely to want to help us than we assume going into the situation.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
So, asking people for requests, for introductions, for help is actually a monumentally good idea, not only because it makes them feel closer to us, but it also helps us benefit from that relationship. And so, once you've kind of navigated for yourself the cultural components and the personality components, and hopefully you've talked yourself out of whatever opinion you might have that may not be necessarily research backed about how inconvenient you'll be for asking someone, then I would say be as liberal with it as you can. I mean, you'll want to read the room a little bit. Like sometimes you over ask and you can tell because people maybe aren't as quick to respond or maybe they ignored that request. It doesn't mean that you've burnt a bridge. It just means, okay, take the note. They are not necessarily as eager to help you the third time around as they were the first time around. But most of the time, we err on the side of being too conservative when it comes to uh, putting our connectors to good use.
You also talk about trying to determine the probability of a prospect, and that's almost the hardest person to convert. So tell us about what is a prospect and why is that tougher one to bring on?
Well, if it's a client, you've already established kind of the ground rules of the relationship, and there's already some sort of win-win dynamic in place, or they wouldn't continue to hire you. When it's a connector, it's usually a win-win because it's I scratch your back, you scratch my back, and I'm going to continue to be helpful to you, and you're going to be continue to be helpful to me, and there's something in it for both of us. But
Mhm.
with a prospect, the dynamic is different. You are in the pursuit role, and until you have convinced them that you are worth their time and potentially worth their investment in you financially once they hire you for something, you have a lot to prove. You've got to go from being a total stranger, being one of those emails in their junk inbox, to someone who they would take seriously and consider to be credible and somebody to be valuable. Now, you do that through helpfulness. You do that through hyper personalization. You do that by being relevant. So rather than sending them the same email you sent 900 other people, you actually do some research on what are some of the things that are important to this person. And you really take the time. Maybe it'll take, 20 minutes and you're using some AI and, you're sort of crafting this very carefully researched message that is just for them. And then you send it to them. This is why you need a short list because you can't do this at volume. It simply takes too much time to measure 3 times before you cut once for each of these communications. So you're sending helpful communications, you're introducing yourself, you're being respectful, you're acknowledging things that they've done. Oh, I went on social media. I saw that you spoke at this panel. That sounds really interesting. I watched the recording of this podcast that you did on Steve Anderson's show, and that was really interesting. I especially appreciated your comments on XYZ, right? You're doing the work to show them that you're not just another rando out there trying to get their business, but that you are investing meaningfully in a connection that will ultimately be satisfying for everyone.
I think it's interesting too in this leadership world of those of us that teach it. There's those four categories. There's the teaching, the mentoring, the coaching, and the sponsorship. And
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to know that if I'm going to sponsor you, that means that I'm going to contact a very trusted relationship that I have and promote you, that's a big ask because
Yes.
that goes against my reputation too. If you crash and fail in that, then I look like an idiot for having sponsored you to that person. So that's a bigger ask, but those are the ones that really, usually have the bite of it.
Well, that's right. And you have to earn the right to being sponsored by someone.
So talk a little bit about in communication too. You talk in the book too about how some people like you words use the word manipulative in earlier, and I know that people, hate that word. They think, oh, if I'm being manipulated, what does that mean? But yet in communication skills, sometimes just using very genuine, specific compliments to people goes a long way. I think people respond to that, and that's something that is part of the strategy in a way.
Steve, I've known you for what are we on? 33 minutes on this show. You and I've never met before. I can give you a very genuine compliment right now. I can say, Steve, I really appreciate the ease and confidence with which you interview. I appreciate that you understand the value of silence. You'll ask a question, you'll let me respond. You're not sort of rushing in to now say the next thing. There's no kind of sense of panic or nervousness in your demeanor. And it just makes you an absolute pleasure to sit here and talk to for a while. No wonder you podcast. I meant every word of what I just said. Now, we don't have to be best friends in order for us to find something that we can elevate and speak to by way of a compliment. But it brings us closer together when we do that. And so, again, I think that just like in asking for help, we overthink or overanalyze the impact of giving a compliment to the negative. And so we reserve ourselves from doing that. But I think we squander an opportunity to reflect on what we're observing that we admire and to share that openly with the other person. This is what relationships that we value are based on. It's like, wow, that person really makes me feel good. I want to hang out with them some more.
Yeah, I don't think there's a person in the world that doesn't want to be complimented in some way or feel good about being getting a compliment from. I often in my leadership teachings, I tell people, sometimes just go into the office or into the meeting or whatever and find a way to kind of make somebody's day, not phony, but just find something positive to comment about. And it goes a long way. What does it take? 10 or 15 seconds? It's not that big a deal. But if you continually do that, I think it comes back to you tenfold.
I want to say one thing. You just did that thing where you finished your sentence and you let some silence rest. I love that you do that. Um, not all interviewers do that, believe it or not. Some of them like they just keep talking, or they leave kind of this false silence that you're not sure if, okay, should I talk now or not? But I want to share with you something that I've learned when it comes to this notion of giving compliments, which is that it's really helpful to be specific. A lot of times we think we're giving compliments when we say, "Oh, great job," or "Yeah, thanks, that was good," or "Hey, you're doing great," right? And after a while, that becomes wallpaper. After the third or fourth time that someone has heard that, they're going to start wondering, what exactly is it that I'm doing that's so great? Can you be specific? Because
Yeah.
then I can do more of that. And I'm sure I'm not just globally doing great, because I know there are some things that I'm working on doing better. So get real specific with me. What is it that you appreciate about me? And this is where this power acknowledgement framework comes into play. So the power acknowledgement is you acknowledge the action they took, the impact it had, and the effort that it took. Because when we work on something, there's usually all of this invisible work in the background, right? It takes 5 times longer than anyone realizes, or it was twice as hard as we made it look. And so when people acknowledge that effort that it took and also the impact that it had, because at the end of it, we all want to make a difference in the world, then we feel seen in ways that are much more meaningful than great job, you're doing great, keep it up.
A lot of people just think they can wing it and just go through this process and just know how to do it, which, obviously there's people that are better at that than others. But in the book, you also talk about at the end of each chapter, you have your to-dos and your worksheets and things that do take a little sit down, reflect. Let's go ahead and jot some things down and have a strategy as opposed to just always winging it.
Well, I ultimately really respond to that myself. I think that when someone gives advice, if it's too high level, if it's too theoretical or conceptual, it might be interesting to listen to, but I'm kind of left with, yeah, but what do I do with that?
Yeah.
How do I activate that in such a way that it's going to have an impact in my life? So when I went about writing the book, I wanted to make sure that we were regularly introducing exercises and worksheets that would enable someone to take these concepts and personalize them and customize them to their own circumstances. That's when the real insights come forward.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. So you went back and got your degree in coaching, and now you work with people that law firms mainly, but other businesses as well. And when you look at that group or the groups that you work with, I know this is a general question, but what are some of the things that you see that are easy fixes that if people just focus on this, they can make a real difference?
Sure. Well, I think one of the things that we see most commonly, especially when it comes to business development, is a failure to follow through. So, what I mean by that is, when we looked at this CRM data, we saw that the most successful users who were out there pursuing business with their relationships had an average of 14 interactions between first contact and first contract. So that was 14 times that they reached out and got a response, which means there may even been more than an average of 14 times that they reached out, because you don't always get a response. So that was really interesting to me because, wow, they stayed in the game, right? They were really persistent. They really, were dedicated to being a consistent communicator in the context of that relationship. Whereas when we looked at all of the other users, the average number of times that they followed up when they met someone new was one. It's a big difference between 1 and 14.
Yes.
So when we polled them, we asked them, well, why did you only follow up one time if you were introduced to someone who was a prospective client or a prospective connector? Why did you just send the one, great to meet you, let's keep each other in mind note, rather than perpetually reaching out with some sort of helpful outreach and staying on their radar? And we got responses like, well, I didn't want to be an inconvenience. I didn't want to come across as salesy. I didn't want to bother them. I got so busy. And, these are things that all make sense in the moment. But at the end of the day, they're just justifications. They are rationalizations that keep you out of a dynamic where you might potentially be rejected. And so I would say that, this aversion to rejection often is the difference between the people who are able to be successful when it comes to business development and those who simply quit the game before they have a chance to win.
You also made a statement in the book where you said rainmakers eliminate non-essential distractions and prioritize essential relationships. So again, that's just that intentional, focused approach as opposed to just letting things go as they will.
Well, that all begins with one's SMART goal. SMART goal is specific, measurable, actionable, realistic, and time bound. And if you don't have a clear SMART goal that you're pursuing, then it's very easy to get distracted because
Mhm.
there are all kinds of, sort of interesting things that we could be doing with our time. But unless they align to usually one, when you take on too many goals, it starts to dilute your focus. So when you have one clear goal that you're looking to accomplish, then you can use that as a filter against which all of the demands of your time are emerging and say, okay, this is either in alignment with that or it's not. That's ultimately going to help you be much more focused and purposeful in where you dedicate this finite resource.
Another thing that I think is real important is understanding the personality type of the person you're talking to.
Mm.
Whether you use the disc profile or whether you use other like systems, it helps you understand that maybe the language that resonates with me may not be exactly the same language that resonates with you. So understanding that. And you talked a little bit about the four intrinsic motivators in the workplace. Like what do people respond to? Is it the physical gifts like money, or is it just quality time with the leader? What are things that, and I think it's important to know that going into those relationships. Otherwise, you're just shooting in the dark.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this all comes from, if you're familiar with the love languages work, the same author ended up creating the languages of appreciation in the workplace. And what we found was that of the five languages, there are four that are dominant in the work environments that we experience, especially in professional services. So as you say, it's gifts, people who are motivated by money, and that's about 50% of the professionals that we work with in professional services. And then the second one tends to be words of affirmation, whether that's awards or accolades or compliments. They like to hear that they're being validated and that what they've achieved is meaningful. Many of them appreciate quality time, so that's mentorship or being included on projects that they deem to be, meaningful and valuable to them. And then finally, acts of service. That's where they feel supported. And that can occur in any number of ways. Either it's, they have the organization gives them an assistant so that they don't have to do all of the administrative work, and that's an act of service. Or it might be looking out for or anticipating a need that they've expressed so that they feel like they're really being heard and supported in their institution.
I remember a story of a leader told me once that at the end of the year he would give bonuses to people he thought were doing a great job, and this one particular person who was a good performer, it always seemed like the money was just, it was like never enough, or he didn't feel like it was appreciated enough, or it just didn't. And so he found out, realized that this person was a really avid mountain biker.
Yeah.
So he went down to the bike shop, talked to the guys, and got this really high-end, really nice mountain bike. And that year gave him the mountain bike, which actually turned out to be less expensive than the cash bonus he gave him before. But he said that act of doing that made him like the hero of all time, and the guy just never forgot it. And he always told all his friends and all his colleagues about how he got this bike and how cool it was and whatever. And so sometimes just finding that right language or that right hook makes a big difference.
Well, I'm sure you interview a lot of leaders who will tell a story that is similar to this, but anyone who has a team has to go through performance evaluations, and usually right around that period of time, there's comp review. And you'll have a meeting with one employee where you have a compensation review, and they're coming into the door with like, okay, where's my raise? And I've done some research, and other organizations are paying people with my role more money, and I don't want to have to start putting my resume out there. Like, they're really going for that higher compensation level. So it's good to go into that meeting prepared that this is how this person is oriented. This is how they experience appreciation. And then the next person comes in and they're almost uncomfortable by the idea of a raise, or it's just, sort of a non-issue. But what they would really appreciate is some more support because they feel overworked. Can we hire someone that I can, that can report to me? Or maybe they're much more interested in some mentorship and some skill building. And so, again, understanding what makes people tick should inform how we compensate and reward them because otherwise we miss the mark. I think in corporate America, we tend to assume that everyone just wants more money. But when you look at the Gallup studies, it turns out that that is true much less of the time than we think. And in fact, it's generational. The younger generations are even less motivated by those things than the boomers and the Xers were.
Let's talk a little bit about LinkedIn. There's a section in the book where you give some real uh, what's the word, advice, I guess, on how to use LinkedIn because that can seem overwhelming. And when am I posting things that are meaningful and helpful? When is it just chatter? And you talk about that, with just 30 minutes a week, that you can definitely improve your time on LinkedIn and have it more fruitful. So tell us a little bit about your theory on that and what do you think is the formula for that?
Sure. Well, again, it goes back to being intentional. I think unless your intention with LinkedIn is just to kind of be aware of what people are talking about and have your finger on the pulse of things, you want to do more than just scroll and stalk other users. If your intention is to ultimately develop your own presence and your own digital brand, then you're going to need to post content. And so the content obviously needs to be an illustration of the kind of expertise that you bring to the table. But when you start to look at your own short list, there's an opportunity to amplify their voices on LinkedIn as well. So obviously, the first thing you want to do is connect to everybody on your short list on LinkedIn. And the second is you want to ring the bell icon. So if you go to anyone's profile, you're going to see this little circle that's got a bell icon in it. And when you click on that, LinkedIn will now start notifying you whenever that person posts something or makes a comment somewhere, or even if they have indicated that they like a particular post. So it helps you stay on their radar. When your notification feed shows that, oh, Steve Anderson is on my short list and he just commented on this other post, I can now click on that. It takes me to Steve's comment and I can like or comment on his comment. Or if Steve posts something, I am immediately going to get notified and I can go and comment on that post. Now, I keep using the word comment here because it's really critical to uh, use that technique over just clicking the thumbs up and liking something. If, I put out a post, I'm going to get a whole bunch of people who like it. And I'm certainly not tracking all of those people. That's just way too many thumbs to be paying attention to. But I'll usually only get two or three comments. So those people who've made that extra effort to amplify my post or engage in the dialogue will show up on my radar. And those are the people who I appreciate for their support of my LinkedIn activity. LinkedIn's algorithm will also reward that post based on the number of comments it accrues. So they're helping me to amplify my message as well.
Tell us a little bit about the lately technique and enjoy most questions. So you talk about that in the book. So share with our listeners what that means.
Sure. You know, the first thing that we typically exchange when we're making conversation with someone that we've met or someone who we know is something along the lines of, how are you? Right? So we'll say, hey, Steve, how are you? How have you been? What's been going on? And I don't know why, but we are sort of socialized to give very perfunctory answers to those questions. So if I say, how have you been? I'm probably going to hear something along the lines of fine. Or if I say, what's been going on lately? You're going to say something like, I've just been really busy. Or, it's the holidays and things are just crazy right now. Or,
Mhm.
I'm going crazy because I'm trying to get to the end of the year and there's this mad sprint. So there's some version of either fine, which is not particularly helpful to the conversation, or busy, which just tells me that maybe we should wrap this up because apparently you have a lot of things you need to get to.
Yeah.
And neither of those things deepen our connection. Neither of those things create an opportunity for a more robust conversation about the details in your life, which ultimately will be the things that I can either contribute to or that I can learn something from that would enable me to look for an opportunity for us to collaborate in some way. So the lately technique is just very simple, which is when you're in conversation with someone, you say, "How are you?" And they say, "Fine." You say, "Really? Well, what's been going fine lately?" Or
Hmm.
if they say, or if you say, "What have you been up to?" And they say, "I've just been really busy." Really? What's been keeping you so busy lately? And
Hmm.
what that does is it builds on their response, but it also invites detail. It invites them to say, "Well, let's see what has been keeping me busy. I've got this new project I'm working on, and it's got this complexity or that complexity. I'm trying to find a new bottle of wine for my wine cellar, and I'm particularly looking for this vintage. And I'm the family is get ready to go out of town on the holidays. So now we're starting to get into the kinds of details where we can either find commonalities or I could be like, well, really, I actually know someone who I'm going to introduce you to somebody who runs a vineyard near where I live. They might be able to fulfill that, shelf opening that you just talked about.
Yeah.
But it gets us away from this superficial chit chat that we tend to fill time with because we're not particularly skilled at having deep conversations.
Yeah. It's interesting you bring up the word busy. I hate the word busy because depending on who says it, if someone says it to me, I'm so busy, I almost feel like they're trying to say because I'm so involved and I'm doing all these great things and whatever. And then if they tell me you seem so busy, to me that's a judgment call.
Mm,
So it's interesting that you bring that up because that is a common one. Oh, I'm so busy, and I just, yeah, what does that mean? Your busy is very different than my busy. And so it's just one of those things that, like you said, it's a filler word.
yes. And speaking of fillers, we also tend to, and this is especially true on Zoom these days, we tend to talk about the weather. Oh, what's the weather like out in LA? Well, it's always perfect. So that's not a great conversation. Or
Yeah.
we'll say, here comes the weekend. What are you going to do this weekend? Right. And so then I'll say, oh, I don't, not much. It's going to be pretty quiet, just watching some Netflix, hanging out with the family. Or we'll say, going anywhere interesting for the holidays. These are the three kind of default things that we go to because, again, we're not particularly profound conversationalists. And those are our default topics. And again, they simply don't drive meaningful connection. So this is why the do for fun technique is something that I talk about in the book because we don't ask each other that question very often. What do you like to do for fun? Because it might not be where you're going this weekend, and it might not be, how the weather is right now, and it might not have anything to do with your travel. It might, but I'm actually interested in what lights you up in life. What gives you joy? What are the things that put a twinkle in your eye? I'd much rather talk about that and find commonalities along those lines because that enables us to maybe explore something we might do together or something that I can bring up that I know will elevate your energy the next time I see you because you're talking about something that makes you happy.
On the other side of all we've been talking about here, there also comes this piece where the art of graciously saying no.
Mm.
Sometimes you have to say no, and that's a really uncomfortable thing for most people to do.
It's true. And I think it goes back to this reluctance we have to be in any kind of a situation where there is rejection. And when you're saying no, you're the one doing the rejecting. But it is a skill that is critical for us to continue to develop for ourselves if we ever expect to have purposeful, intentional lives. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, we say yes to too many things. We find ourselves doing half of them we don't even want to do. We just didn't want to say no. And again, we're back to squandering this finite resource of our time.
Yeah, you violate the theme of the whole book, which is quality over quantity.
That's right. That's right. And in the book, I give some scripts for some ways to say no that are maybe a little gentler, a little more respectful, but still get you the outcome, which is setting the boundary that you need to set.
And if anyone isn't buying all we're talking about today with building these networks and building relationships and all that, I think that strong social networks actually have scientific proof that people live longer when they have them.
Yeah, that's right. That's
Yeah.
right. Ultimately, I mean, I think one of the most blatant examples of this is when you see someone who is, in the sort of final chapters of their life and they lose a spouse, and within a year they pass as well. But when those same people are part of stronger communities, they tend to have longer lifespans beyond, outliving their spouse, simply because that human connection gives us more reason to stick around and more opportunities to benefit from other people and be part of a tribe that gives us part of this life force.
And David, in anticipation of our discussion today, is there anything I haven't asked you or anything we haven't covered that you'd like to get into the show today?
You've been very thorough. I really appreciate the amount of time that you spent getting familiar with the book, and you're asking great questions that hopefully will enable folks listening today to, glean some of the nuggets that certainly resonated for you.
So at this point in the interview, I always ask my guests the same common question, and that question is, in relation to leadership, what is a pearl of wisdom that you could leave us with today?
I think for me, I am learning more and more that leadership is an exercise in practicing selflessness. And I used to think it was the opposite. As a former actor, I used to think leadership is a way of getting attention. Leadership is being the center of attention. Leadership is the person who everybody looks to see, what we should be doing. But right now, I've got a really talented group of people at the company who I am grooming to elevate in their own leadership capacity. And I find that many times in the past, when people would come to me and say, "Well, David, what's the answer?" I would give them the answer. These days, they're saying, "David, what's the answer?" And I'm saying, "Well, what do you think the answer is?" Or they're saying, "Hey, listen, will you sort of let everyone know that?" I'll give you an example. I have one of my people on my team is going to give a presentation next week to others on the leadership team, and she said, "Will you tell everyone to hold questions so that I can get through my presentation?" And I said, "No, but you
Mhm.
can ask them to hold questions. You want to practice being a leader." And so, ask for what you want. And so, I'm finding my own style in leadership to be much more about, I guess it's called servant leadership, or just being someone who is there to empower others rather than being someone who needs that attention themselves.
That is really well said. So what does 2026 look like for Pipeline Plus and David Ackert?
Well, we are on a really exciting growth track. The shortlist obviously made a big difference coming out this year and made a big splash in our industry, and introduced people to this shortlist method, this notion of 9 to 35 contacts, 14 interactions, being more purposeful, and being driven by a SMART goal. What we're doing in 2026 is productizing that methodology so that more and more firms are using it as their centralized unifying theme around how they go out to the market and develop business. So rather than this person does this thing and that person does something else and this other person does nothing, firms now start to infuse the shortlist as part of their internal methodology. So we're really excited about bringing that to the marketplace and providing the support that enables firms to really embed this thinking into the way that they grow.
That sounds great. Now, do you ever still get the itch to get up on that stage or get behind the camera? Can you see yourself doing any of that in the future?
I don't.
Yeah.
I do so much public speaking now as an author and as someone who has always enjoyed that part of this work, that I find the itch gets scratched through that.
Yeah.
And unlike being an actor, I have a lot more influence over when I get to perform when I'm, the CEO of a company where I also get to do public speaking. So I think I'll just stick with that.
Well, David, this has been a real pleasure. As you can tell, I love the book. I think it's well done, and I got a lot out of it. So, thanks for sharing that with all of us. And I think the things you're talking about make a lot of sense. And sometimes, as I try and tell my clients, try and take the chaos and make it more simple. And I kind of feel like that's what you've done. A lot of these concepts you're talking about are things we kind of know or think about, but when you get it down into a more simple form, it makes total sense. And it also makes it like, oh, I could actually do this and I could actually make a big difference. So thanks for sharing that.
I appreciate that, Steve. That was absolutely my intention, is making this stuff achievable.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks so much for your time today. I really appreciate it. And maybe we'll see each other down the road one of these days.
It's been a pleasure, Steve. Thanks for the opportunity.
Okay. Bye bye. Thank you for listening to another episode of Profiles in Leadership. To listen to all my interviews, subscribe to Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson on Apple Podcasts, iTunes, and many other popular podcast platforms. Some of these interviews are on video, and you can search YouTube for Profiles in Leadership with Steve Anderson. You can also access the entire library of interviews on my website, orange.coaching.com, and that is orangetheword.coaching.com, and go to the Media Center and click on Podcasts or Video Gallery. You can also enter the website from pilpodcast.com.